billionaire gave her credit card to a homeless single dad to test him. And in the span of 24 hours, what he bought broke her heart so deeply that even her wealth couldn't shield her from the truth of human struggle. On that icy morning outside the upscale Manhattan cafe, Eleanor Kensington, heir to a Fortune 6 conglomerate, expected the homeless father she met beneath the subway bridge to choose greed, luxury, pleasure, maybe a new phone or designer shoes. But the moment she handed him her platinum card, the man's hands shook like someone who hadn't held hope in years, his son clinging to his coat like fragile breath in winter. Why would a billionaire test a homeless single father? And why would the man's purchase with her unlimited wealth make even a billionaire cry? Eleanor had seen homelessness her whole life, but only from behind tinted bulletproof limousine windows. Her father used to tell her, "We don't give cash. People waste what they're given." And she had believed him for years, almost stubbornly. But at 29, something in her had begun to fracture. Money didn't warm her penthouse bed. Charity galas didn't heal the restless ache in her chest. She had everything, yet she felt painfully poor in ways she couldn't name. That morning had not been planned. She was supposed to be heading to a board meeting, leather gloves matching the mocha tone of her winter coat, stilettos tapping the pavement like power itself. Then she saw him, sitting beside a sleeping 7-year-old boy wrapped in a threadbare blanket, his boots worn through at the toes. A cardboard sign rested against his knee. "Single dad, homeless, will work for food." It wasn't the sign that stopped her. It was the way he looked at his son, like nothing in the world mattered but keeping that child alive. His eyes were hollow, yes, but warm, human. The kind of eyes that had once known stability, love, a home. She approached slowly, unsure why her legs moved on impulse rather than logic. "Sir?" she said gently. He looked up, startled as though kindness itself was unfamiliar. His voice, when it came, was low. "Ma'am, we're fine. You don't have to stop." But she couldn't walk away. Instead, she knelt, ruining a pair of Italian pants worth more than his entire week's survival, and studied his face. Light stubble, untrimmed hair, maybe 33. There was dignity in how he spoke, even in desperation. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jackson," he murmured, then brushed his fingers against his son's shoulder. "And this is Noah." Noah stirred, opening wide, tired eyes, the kind of eyes a child shouldn't have. No toys, no safety, too much silence for a boy his age. Something in her chest cracked. She thought of her own mother, long gone, of how she once braided Eleanor's hair before school, kissed her forehead, tucked warmth into every day. This child had none of that now. Her father would have written a check and left without touching the ground. But Eleanor was not her father. She reached into her purse, slowly, almost uncertainly. A platinum credit card glinted between her fingers like a challenge to fate. Jackson blinked, unable to comprehend. "This," she said softly, placing it in his trembling hand, "is yours for one day." His jaw slackened. "Ma'am, I don't understand." Eleanor inhaled cold air that tasted like risk. "Buy whatever you want. No limits, no questions. I want to see something." He stared at the card as if it were a live wire. The baby blanket slipped off Noah's shoulder and Jackson immediately lifted it back up. The movement was tender, natural, practiced. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because I want to believe," she said. "Believe that the world still remembers how to care." He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. No promises, no swearing honesty, just a nod, small, grateful, scared. As he rose, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar. Fear, not fear of losing money. She could earn thousands before lunch, but fear that her experiment would prove her father right. That kindness was foolish, wasteful, naive. She stepped back, watched Jackson tuck the card into his pocket, gather Noah in his arms, and begin walking toward the city, with purpose in his stride, like a man suddenly carrying the weight of possibility. Eleanor exhaled white breath into the cold air. If he bought jewelry, she would know. If he bought liquor, she would know. If he vanished, she would know. But if he bought something unexpected, if this homeless single father used billionaire money for something else, for someone else, then maybe life still had something to teach her. She stood in the snow long after they disappeared, her heartbeat louder than the city itself, unaware that what Jackson was going to buy with that platinum card wouldn't just test her, it would change her forever. Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. Her penthouse windows stretched floor to ceiling, reflecting a glittering New York skyline that most people only dreamed of, yet she stood in complete darkness, barefoot on imported marble, replaying Jackson's expression over and over, the disbelief, the hope, the fear. She had handed out donations before, signed checks, attended galas with chandeliers that cost more than schools, but she had never looked a struggling person in the eyes and trusted them with something as powerful as choice. Choice was a luxury, choice was a currency, and Jackson, a homeless single dad, now held a billionaire's unlimited credit card. Her mind raced with possibilities. Would he disappear and never return? Buy something selfish? Would he fail the test her heart secretly prayed he'd pass? She opened her laptop, scrolling financial alerts tied to the card. Hours passed. Midnight. 2. 3. No activity. Nothing. Not even $1. Why wasn't he spending? Why wait when you could buy everything you'd ever wanted? Unless he didn't know what to choose. Or, worse, didn't believe he deserved to choose. The thought pricked deeper than she expected. By 6:30 a.m. she was still awake when her phone chimed. Transaction notification, 4327, grocery store, Upper West Side, then another, $18.96, drugstore, then $52.11, children's clothing. Her heartbeat quickened, not disappointment, but something warmer, something that felt like sunrise through ribs. He didn't buy liquor, not electronics, no designer sneakers. He was buying survival. She grabbed her coat, rushed to her private elevator. Her staff blinked at her arrival, unannounced, unstyled, hair loose like a woman who forgot wealth. "Cancel my meetings," she told her assistant, voice firm. "But the investors—" "Cancel everything." No title, no legacy, no business mattered as much as knowing what came next. She called her driver and gave the address attached to the grocery receipt, but 5 blocks away she asked him to stop. She walked instead, needing to feel pavement, cold air, city life she'd never touched properly. She found Jackson outside a laundromat, steam fogging the windows. Noah sat beside him on a bench wearing a new navy coat, cheap but warm. A bag of groceries rested by their feet. Jackson was folding Noah's tiny shirt, concentration deep, gentle as prayer. He didn't look like a man who had been handed access to infinite money. He looked like a father trying to make one day better than the last. Eleanor approached quietly. Jackson looked up immediately, almost guilty, like a student facing a grade. I was going to return the card," he said quickly. "I just needed a little time." "You still have it?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." He reached into his coat, handed it back with both hands, respectful, careful, like it was fragile glass instead of titanium. She didn't take it. "What did you buy?" she asked softly. His eyes flickered with hesitation. "Food, medicine for Noah's cough, clothes, toothpaste, shampoo, soap, things we needed." "And nothing for yourself?" He shook his head. "My son comes first, always." There was more. She could feel it, like a door half open. "What else?" she asked. He swallowed, then handed her a receipt. The last line hit her like a fist. Fort Greene Community Kitchen. $200 donation. She looked up, stunned. "You gave money away?" she whispered. "They feed families like us, people worse off than me. Sometimes a little kindness is all someone has left." He said it simply, without asking for praise, without knowing she was a woman starving for proof that kindness still lived. Her eyes burned. She looked at Noah, small hands clutching a sandwich, crumbs on his chin, innocent, fragile, surviving. "How long have you been homeless?" she asked. Jackson exhaled, the kind that carries years. "Since my wife died," he said. 3 winters ago. She had cancer. Insurance dropped us. Savings gone in months. I worked overtime, deliveries, construction, anything I could, but grief doesn't pay rent. When Noah was born, she was already gone. I've been trying ever since." He didn't cry, his voice didn't break, but there was a quiet devastation behind every word. "My father told me never to trust people," Eleanor murmured. Jackson nodded slowly. "People break each other, but they also save each other." A gust of wind scattered snowflakes across the pavement. A city bus passed, lights reflecting off puddles like bruised mirrors. Eleanor finally asked the question she feared most. "Jackson, if I hadn't come yesterday, what would you have done?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "I would have kept trying, even without money. My son deserves a father who fights." Those words pierced her chest more sharply than any betrayal she'd ever endured. Wealth couldn't buy that kind of devotion. Legacy couldn't manufacture it. She sat beside him on the cold metal bench, ignoring frost through wool, ignoring the curious stares of people passing by. A billionaire and a homeless single dad. Opposite worlds, yet somehow aligned. She still hadn't taken back the card. And as she looked at Noah's small smile, Jackson's steady patience, the warmth of a man who had every reason to break, but didn't, she realized. Her test was no longer about him, it was about herself. Could a woman born into everything learn how to give in a way that actually mattered? Could privilege become purpose? Her life was about to change, because what Jackson would buy next would break her heart in a way she'd never recover from. Eleanor should have walked away that morning, but something held her there, anchored to the bench beside a man the world had forgotten. Her security chief called twice. Her assistant texted relentlessly. A meeting worth $14 million waited unanswered, but she stayed, because for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking like a billionaire. She was thinking like a human being. Jackson finished folding Noah's clothes, stacking them neatly in a plastic bag. His movements were slow, deliberate, shaped by someone who hadn't had space to rush in a long time. Noah leaned sleepily against his father's arm, full from breakfast, warm in a coat that actually fit. A small miracle, a temporary one. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. Jackson looked down at his shoes, hesitating. "Under the bridge near East River. We move if the cops sweep. Sometimes shelters take us, sometimes they don't. They're overcrowded." Her throat tightened. That bridge. Wind knifed through its concrete like raw ice. No heating, no walls, just cold metal and cold nights. A child sleeping there. Noah with soft cheeks and tiny sneakers. It almost made her sick. "You can't stay there tonight," she whispered. He stiffened, pride rising fast. "We manage. We don't take advantage." "This isn't advantage," she said. "It's survival." But Jackson had spent years losing everything: home, wife, dignity, and men who lose much develop an armor made of refusal. He didn't want pity, he didn't want saving, he wanted fairness, opportunity, a chance to stand again. A silence stretched between them, raw, fragile. Noah looked up at her suddenly, voice small. "Are you an angel?" Eleanor felt the breath leave her body. She had been called many things, powerful, ruthless, privileged, but never that. She blinked quickly, eyes blurring despite her will. "Not even close," she said softly. "Just someone who cares more today than she did yesterday." Jackson watched her, and something shifted in his expression. Trust, maybe. Or the beginning of it. "Come with me," he finally said. "There's something I want to do before I give the card back." Eleanor stood, heartbeat loud with curiosity, and followed them through streets she rarely walked, past bodegas and laundromats, past steaming manholes and vendors selling pretzels for $4 apiece, past people who moved fast because life demanded it. 20 minutes later, they reached a rundown public library, bricks chipped, paint faded from years of neglect. Jackson pushed the door open, held it for her, a gentleman gesture from a man who had nothing. Inside, warmth hugged them softly. Children's drawings covered a bulletin board. A librarian looked up from behind worn glasses and smiled at Noah with familiarity. "You're back," she said fondly. Jackson nodded. Just for a moment. He led Eleanor down an aisle to the computer station. 4 old desktops hummed weakly, screens flickering like dying stars. A sign read, "Limit, 30 minutes per person." "This," Jackson said, resting a hand on one of the monitors, "was where my wife used to bring him. She wanted Noah to grow up reading, learning, dreaming." His voice quivered for the first time. "We lost so much, but I want him to have at least one piece of her left." Noah climbed onto a chair, swinging his feet. Eleanor felt the atmosphere shift, gentle, sacred, like a memory alive in air. Jackson took out the credit card, and for the first time, she saw hunger in his eyes. Not for luxury, not for escape, but for hope. "I want to buy him a future," he said. "Books, educational programs, a monthly card to use the computers here. I know it sounds small compared to what that card can do." "It sounds enormous," she breathed, because a man with nothing chose knowledge over indulgence, legacy over comfort, growth over relief. A billionaire would buy buildings. A homeless father wanted books. He approached the counter and asked the librarian for pricing. Eleanor stood behind, listening as he requested memberships, reading materials, learning tools. When asked how he'd pay, he handed her the platinum card, humble, nervous, but steady. The librarian blinked. "Sir, are you certain?" "Yes," he whispered, "my son deserves a chance." The total came to $612.54. Jackson exhaled relief, as if the number itself was a gift rather than a cost. But before he could sign, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his wrist. "Jackson," she murmured, "what if I told you this doesn't have to be temporary?" He froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," her voice shook with something vulnerable, honest, "that I don't want this to end with one day and one card." He stared at her like someone afraid to hope too loudly. "I want to help you long term," she continued. "Housing, work, stability, not charity, opportunity." Silence fell between them, weighed with possibility. "You don't know me," Jackson said quietly. "No," she agreed, "but I want to." His eyes glimmered, pain, disbelief, longing tangled into one raw thread. Years of struggle carved into a single silent question. Why would a billionaire care about a man like me? Before Eleanor could answer, Noah tugged her sleeve, voice tiny yet powerful. "Miss Eleanor, can we get Mommy's favorite book too?" The request sliced straight through her. Mommy's favorite book. A ghost asking to be remembered. Her heart broke clean open. She swallowed hard, blinking away tears. "Yes, Noah," she whispered him. "Pick any book you want." And Jackson, watching her as his son walked toward the shelves, looked at her with something deeper than gratitude, something close to faith. Neither of them knew that the next purchase Jackson made would shatter Eleanor's world beyond anything a receipt could record. Noah returned cradling a hardcover book almost as big as his chest. The cover was worn, pages yellowed, corners softened by years of being loved by someone who mattered. The title shimmered faintly, The Secret Garden. Jackson froze when he saw it, like he'd been hit with memory rather than sound. That was her book, he whispered, voice fracturing at the edges. His mother read it every night while she was pregnant. She said it was about growth, healing, a place where flowers bloom even after winter. Noah hugged it tightly. I want to read it like she did. Eleanor felt the ground beneath her morality shift. For the first time in her life, money wasn't numbers. It was medicine, shelter, closure, love. She paid for everything quietly when Jackson tried to sign, pressing her thumb to the terminal instead, voice steady but warm. My gift, she said, but your choice. And Jackson, who had spent 3 years losing everything one piece at a time, didn't argue. It wasn't surrender, it was acceptance. Outside, snow began to fall like someone shaking feathers from heaven. Jackson placed Noah atop his shoulders, the little boy squealing, pointing, reaching for flakes like stars he could finally touch. For a moment, the world was slow, soft, merciful. Eleanor walked beside them, hands tucked in her pockets, heart oddly light and heavy at once. You meant what you said, Jackson murmured. About helping us. Yes, she said without hesitation. A home, school for Noah, a job for you. I have companies in need of men who know hardship, not just power. He stopped walking, turned to her fully. Why? He asked, not suspicious, but deeply, painfully vulnerable. Why us? Eleanor looked at him, and the truth came like breath. Because you reminded me I'm not alive just to multiply wealth. I'm alive to multiply meaning. His throat tightened. He tried to respond. Failed. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if agreeing with life for the first time in years. But the world rarely crowns tenderness without testing it. Just as they reached the corner, Noah coughed. Sharp, wet, deep. Not like a cold, like something rooted in lungs too small for such struggle. Jackson bent down immediately, worry etching across his face like lightning. It's worse today, he said tensely. He's had this cough for weeks. Clinic turned us away yesterday. We had no insurance. I was going to try again next week. Eleanor's pulse spiked. How long has he been sick? 63 days, Jackson whispered, shame coloring every syllable. We counted. We count everything. 63 days. A homeless child coughing through winter. That number carved itself into her memory like scripture. Come with me, now. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. No more waiting. He didn't protest. They took a cab, her hand on Noah's back, Jackson watching him like prayer in human form. At St. Matthew's Children's Hospital, doors parted automatically, warm air kissing cold skin. Nurses approached. Eleanor didn't give her title, didn't mention her fortune. She simply pointed to Noah and said, "He needs help, please." Her tone carried authority without needing money to validate it. Tests ran, blood drawn. Jackson paced. Eleanor sat with Noah, reading The Secret Garden softly, her voice fragile but steady. The child leaned into her, trusting someone who had been a stranger yesterday, and somehow it felt right. Hours later, a doctor stepped out, respectful, tired, sincere. Your son has early-stage pneumonia. If untreated, it could have become fatal in weeks. Jackson closed his eyes like the floor beneath him vanished. Eleanor reached instinctively and steadied him with a hand on his shoulder, a touch bridging two worlds. He'll recover, the doctor continued gently, but he needs medication, warm housing, nutrition. Warm housing, she looked at Jackson. His eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with gratitude carved from bone. What he bought, the doctor added, glancing at Eleanor as if sensing something deeper may have saved his child's life. Eleanor's breath shattered inside her. The Billionaire credit card hadn't been used for greed. It had been used for survival, books, food, medicine, love. What he bought with her wealth broke her heart, not because it was wrong, but because it was pure. And suddenly, wealth felt small. 2 days later, Eleanor signed a lease for a modest apartment, clean, warm, with sunlight that kissed the walls like forgiving dawn. She arranged school admissions, pediatric care, vouchers, clothing, and Jackson, stunned but grounded, began working at one of her community redevelopment firms, honest work rebuilding old structures into homes for families like his, not charity, dignity. The three of them stood in the empty living room when the keys exchanged hands. Noah twirled, giggling as if finally allowed to exist loudly. Jackson faced Eleanor, eyes bright with a future he once thought belonged to other men. "I don't know how to repay you," he said. "You already have," she whispered. "How?" "You showed me what wealth is for. Not power, purpose." He stepped closer, not romantic, not indebted, but equal. A man who could stand again. "If you ever need anything, you ask me first," he said. She smiled softly. "Then start with dinner. I don't want this to be the end of our story." Jackson nodded slowly. Noah wrapped his arms around both of them, tiny warmth binding enormous change. And in that plain apartment with cream walls and second-hand furniture, something bloomed. A billionaire found meaning, a homeless father found home, and a child, once taught to fear winters, learned how spring begins.